there are Muslims who have actually left Islam because of the content they have seen coming from certain Muslim content creators. So when some of us show a concern and we speak out against this behavior, it's not because we're jealous. It's not because we're backstabbers. It's because we see some of the harm that's being spread. We see our beautiful religion being misrepresented. Bismillah walhamdulillah wa salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome all viewers. Yesterday I began answering a question that a brother posed under the video. You want to debate Islam, bro? So today I will continue answering his question. Just to recap, the brother asked, Assalamu alaikum, Brother Sajid, I've been following a particular da'i and company for a while, and one could say I'm from their camp too. But I do see your point. It would be great if you could make a video elaborating more concretely on what you think would be the best way to approach da'wah and what you would do differently, say, in the speaker's corner. Especially what would be the best way to approach those staunch atheists who only listen to rational arguments. JazakumAllahukhairan. So in yesterday's video, I responded to the question about how to approach da'wah, and in this video, I'm going to respond to the question about speaker's corner. And just like I took a foundational approach when talking about da'wah, let's also take a foundational approach when talking about speaker's corner. And a reason why this is an important way to think about these topics is because there are a lot of assumptions that people have just been led to believe. Like when it comes to da'wah, and in yesterday's video when we were going through this book, how many people have actually approached da'wah in such a way? How many people even considered da'wah to be a topic that they held in such high esteem? I think many people's introduction to even the term da'wah has been through certain individuals and their behavior online, which unfortunately in many cases completely contradict what we went over in this book. Likewise, there seems to just be this assumption that speaker's corner is ground zero for da'wah. Going there and speaking to people, this is the pinnacle of being a da'i. This is what it's all about. They're at the front lines. And there's no doubt this assumption is partly due to the fact that people are following individuals who spread this rhetoric. So the first thing to do here, as the saying goes, is empty your cup. Let's cleanse ourselves of all these assumptions and really take a look at Speaker's Corner. Firstly, what is Speaker's Corner? Wikipedia says that a Speaker's Corner is an area where free speech, open-air public speaking, debate, and discussion are allowed. The original and best known is in the northeast corner of Hyde Park in London, England. Now, of course, most of us are already familiar with Speaker's Corner because of videos that are recorded there. For many years now, there have been countless videos uploaded to YouTube showing all sorts of different things that have happened at Speaker's Corner. And such videos tend to be very popular. Right now, I would say that videos of people arguing and debating are at an all-time high in terms of popularity. However, the question that we want to consider today is Speaker's Corner a good place to go and give da'wah? Let's weigh the pros and the cons. Let's start with the pros. What are some of the potential benefits of somebody going to Speaker's Corner to give da'wah? Well, considering that it is an area where free speech, open-air public speaking is allowed, this means that Muslims could potentially go there, convey the message of Islam to all the listeners, and perhaps there will be people there who are educated. People might even embrace Islam. It could be a place to build a social network where you meet like-minded people, you meet other Muslims, and that seems to be the potential benefits. So now let's move on to the cons. What are some of the potential harms and negatives to going to a place like Speaker's Corner? Now, firstly, if you watched yesterday's video when we went through this book about the characteristics that somebody who is calling the people to Islam should have, the very first thing mentioned was ilm, was knowledge. It also heavily emphasized having good manners. Now, at Speaker's Corner, absolutely anybody can speak, whether they have knowledge or not, whether they have good manners or not, whether they know what they're talking about or not. And this is not only problematic to the people listening to these individuals, but it's actually extremely dangerous for these individuals themselves. As we mentioned yesterday, the hadith of the first three people to be held account on the Day of Judgment and how they will be thrown into the hellfire. Even though seemingly they were doing good deeds. Seemingly they were engaged in some of the greatest acts of worship. However, in order for our acts of worship to be accepted, we have to have knowledge, we have to have sincerity, and we have to follow the Quran and Sunnah. So if people are not even fulfilling these requirements before going and speaking at a place like Hyde Park, then they should be more worried about themselves than calling anyone else to Islam. The steps, brothers and sisters, are first, you get knowledge, then you act upon the knowledge, then you invite to the knowledge, and then you have patience. Furthermore, nowadays with social media and the fact that a lot of these speakers, corners, videos, and speakers get so many views and followers, the stakes are very high. There seems to be this misconception where people think, oh, on the day of judgment, all of my subscribers is going to mean nothing. On the contrary, the responsibility is that much greater. If you have, for example, 500,000 subscribers, 1 million subscribers, you are responsible for what you are presenting to them, and you will be held accountable. As we established in yesterday's video, Islam, da'wah, it's not somebody's plaything. It's not a means of entertainment. So those are just some things to think about in regards to the individual involved in giving da'wah. But what about the listeners? What about the people who come and are listening to the person calling to Islam? Let's assume for the sake of argument that the da'i is actually saying things that are correct. But one of the issues is that this is not an exclusive platform for Muslims to convey the truth to people, but rather any and everybody can speak. So you'll also find at Speaker's Corner people calling away from Islam, people slandering and spreading doubts about Islam. Therefore, the audience is also going to be exposed to all of that. Now, generally what happens if there's a Muslim and he's trying to give da'wah, and then you have a non-Muslim who comes and starts slandering the religion? Well, in many cases, an argument will ensue. And these arguments, these debates, brothers and sisters, this is really what gets the most attention, what gets the most views. And because so many people like to see this sort of thing, and the numbers don't lie, the views don't lie, the ad revenue doesn't lie, this has spread far and wide. This, for many people, has become what they think of when it comes to da'wah. They're not thinking about the information that's in this book. They're thinking about the YouTube videos that they see of Muslims arguing with non-Muslims. And this is the reason I've been speaking about this topic. Now, this doesn't mean that arguing and debating in every single sense, every single situation is haram. However, a better question to ask is not whether arguing and debating is haram in every single instance, but rather you should ask, well, what does arguing mean? What does debating mean? When is it appropriate and when is it not appropriate? I'd like to give the following example regarding how some people try to present the current da'wah debate culture as not only being halal, but being like a necessity, like as if it is wajib. It's kind of like if I put out a bunch of videos talking about the dangers of intermingling between non-mahram men and women. And I bring forth ayat and a hadith warning against this, talking about the dangers of it. But then proponents of intermingling come and they say, oh, look at Sajid saying that men and women talking to each other is completely haram. This is ridiculous. Look at these examples from the Quran and Sunnah of men and women actually interacting with one another. Therefore, one of the greatest things that we can do is have non-mahram men and women sitting on couches in front of cameras, talking about their love lives with one another. This is the sort of ridiculousness that we're seeing. And I don't even know if people are going to pick up on the fact that non-mahram men sitting on couches discussing these things is actually wrong, because there are people who do that as well. I used it as an example because I thought maybe it would be obvious to people. But subhanAllah, the more and more we seem to go down the social media spiral, the less people seem to understand the very basics. This is why in a previous video I was showing how so many sayings and statements from the Sahaba, from the ulama of Ahl Sunnah, have always warned against debating and arguing. But it's a well-known characteristic. When you study the deen, the people of desires, they have certain characteristics. And what they'll do is they will ignore so many different ayat and hadith warning against something, but then stick to one or two things that are vague that they can use to suit their desires. But back to debating. Why is something like debating so frowned upon? Well, for starters, one thing that happens is your audience is going to be presented falsehood. I've also made videos in the past regarding what scholars have said about not exposing yourself to falsehood. But the way that so many of these modern day debates are set up is that is exactly what a Muslim is doing. He is giving a platform so that countless Muslims can be exposed to falsehood. Another thing that typically happens in debates and arguments is good akhlaq, good manners, is completely out the window. There's footage, for example, at Speaker's Corner with some of these Muslims challenging other people to fights, talking about their mothers, taking other people's property. Brothers and sisters, is this da'wah? Is this what we were talking about? Is this what we saw in this book? The characteristics of somebody calling to Islam? Now, when all this drama takes place, this is actually the stuff that gets the most attention. So what most people are going to see, it's not going to be this monologue of somebody conveying the message of Islam, but it's going to be these fights, these arguments, these debates, these insult sessions, the drama. And that, brothers and sisters, is what so many people are going to be exposed to. That is the image of a Muslim, of a da'i, that many people are going to get. And this leads me to the final point I want to mention today. And that is the potential harm that this sort of behavior has. Of course, it's very noticeable when somebody takes their shahada. It's very noticeable when you get certain comments like, you know what, I saw these videos at Speaker's Corner and I became Muslim, alhamdulillah. But one thing I hardly ever hear anybody talking about is how many people are completely turned off. How many people see the circus and theatrics of Speaker's Corner and all these debates and arguments and the way that certain Muslims conduct themselves, and they say, no thanks, I'm good. If this is how your religion teaches you to behave, I'm not interested. A point that I even forgot to mention is that when you're debating, your opponent and their crowd is going to be defensive. They don't want to be humiliated. In many cases, their heart is not going to be open to the truth because they feel cornered. I mean, there is so much to be said about the negatives that come with all of these things. Does that mean that there is absolutely no positives? No, I mentioned some of the positives. But what about all the negatives? And what does the Quran and Sunnah say about all this anyway? When we really look at the evidence, we really look at what the scholars of this religion have said about this sort of behavior, are we ready to accept it? Or do we just enjoy the theatrics too much? Many Muslims have had a crisis of faith due to all this madness. I've received emails of Muslims who are just shocked. They can't fathom, like, why is a particular Muslim da'i behaving the way that he's behaving, saying the things that he's saying? And this is also why sometimes I have to distance myself from certain individuals. Because they'll assume, oh, Brother Sajid, you've promoted certain individuals in the past. But look at how they're behaving. Look at the things that they're saying. And it shakes them to their core. There are Muslims who have actually left Islam because of the content they have seen coming from certain Muslim content creators. So when some of us show a concern and we speak out against this behavior, it's not because we're jealous. It's not because we're backstabbers. It's because we see some of the harm that's being spread. We see our beautiful religion being misrepresented. And from what I've seen, it only seems to be spreading more and more. So you all can do with this information what you will. Allah knows best. May Allah accept from us. May Allah forgive us. May Allah guide us. Inshallah, I will finish answering the question in a future video about the best way to approach those staunch atheists who only listen to rational arguments. If you made it to the end of the video, please let me know in the comments by telling me which country you're from. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.